libertarianism of late has seemed to be losing steam in the United States. Of course, the heyday of libertarianism, in my opinion, was in 2008 when Ron Paul was running for president. But as many people I've interviewed have said, libertarianism does not seem to be taking hold with the majority of the American people. And that's a shame, because it's the mission of this channel, it's the mission of the guests that we're having on also, to spread the ideas of libertarianism, because libertarianism is, in my view, the rightful successor of classical liberalism. The guest we have today is Mr. Jacob Hornberger. He is a pioneer of libertarianism. He's a two-time presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. He is a former attorney, and he is the head of the Future of Freedom Foundation, which is a foundation that's dedicated to spreading the ideas of libertarianism. So, Mr. Hornberger, thank you so much for joining us at this virtual table today.
Oh, my honor, my pleasure, Javier. Feel free to call me Jacob, though.
All right, Jacob. And you and I seem to. Oh, and you have a dog there in the background. Huh?
I do.
I also have a dog here to the side. So I wouldn't.
That's not my dog. That's my princess.
Oh, you're a princess. Okay, there you go. They're very beautiful companions, aren't they?
Oh, they're wonderful.
I would say that you and I have a pretty common background, sort of common trajectory. We both have roots in Laredo, Texas. And my father was born in Laredo. You were born and raised in Laredo, Texas. We both seems that we're half Mexican and half American. My father's Mexican background. My mother's from Alabama. She's American background. I believe it's the reverse on your side. Your father was American background. Your mother was a Mexican background. Laredo is a very special place. Can you convey to us a little bit of what it was like to grow up in Laredo and how that actually shaped you, perhaps shaped some of your libertarian views later?
It's impossible to describe to someone what border culture is like, especially in Laredo, because it's so different from the rest of the country. Keep in mind that this was a part of Texas that was once part of Mexico, that was once part of Spain. And so much of our culture is Spanish Mexican. If you look at the street signs, Malinche and Iturbide, I mean, these are names that go back into Mexican and Spanish history, not American history. And when I was growing up, I would estimate that around 98% of Laredoans were Mexican American, and only about 2% were Anglo. And there was never any discrimination one way or the other. I didn't even know about discrimination when I was growing up. It was just, everybody got along fine. And I would say most conversations, daily conversations, were in Spanish. I went back to Laredo about 10 years or so ago and walked around McDonald's doing an informal survey, and at least half the conversations at the tables were in Spanish. And when you walk into Walmart, for example, and there's a greeter, she will immediately size you up as to whether she should say buenos dias or good morning. And the store signs are both English and in Spanish. So it's a totally different culture. I grew up on the border on a ranch, a farm on the Rio Grande. We hired illegal immigrants on our farm. It was just normal. It wasn't illegal at that time. And they were the hardest working people I've ever seen. They were our buddies. My brothers and I, we worked in the fields with them. We played football with them after work. And so when I saw the Border Patrol go after people, including people on our farm, they could enter our farm without a search warrant. A search warrant whenever they wanted. It horrified me. And I wasn't even a libertarian back then. That was my first exposure to the concept of libertarianism, the idea that the horrifying concept of a government being able to come onto your property without a search warrant and seize your workers who were there voluntarily and cart them away by force. And so that was my very first exposure to the power of the federal government. So it was a totally different way to grow up.
It is pretty traumatic when you see that. And just, it's interesting because have you heard of Zapata, Texas?
Oh yeah, we went down to Zapata all the time, or not
So
all the time,
my
but
grandmother owned a ranch in Zapata, and so we would
okay.
go hunting on it all the time. So you have a rancher. I believe your father was a rancher, correct?
My grandfather on my mother's
Grandfather.
side. Yeah.
So we have that in common as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, we'd go down to Falcon Lake, and we had a little
Yes.
lot. My dad had a little lot on Falcon Lake, which is right near Zapata.
And so you practice. I was reading a little bit of your book. You practiced law in Laredo. That was, in fact, that was the only place you practiced law, correct?
No, I practiced law there about 8 years, I believe, and then I was in partnership with my father, who was a lawyer, and then he passed away. And after a year there, I decided that I wanted to go to Dallas for the big city practice of law. So I moved to Dallas and started my own practice there and practiced there for 4 years. So it was both Laredo and in Dallas that I was practicing law. But in Laredo was where I had the opportunity to represent illegal immigrants. As soon as I got my law license and I moved to Laredo, I made an appointment with the local federal judge. And because I hated the whole system. I mean, and this was before discovering libertarianism. It's just a very arbitrary system, a very discriminatory system. So I asked the federal judge to appoint me to represent illegal immigrants, and I told him I'd do it for free. And he said, fine. So I would go out and he'd appoint me. I go out to the detention center, interview my clients, and do my best to represent them. So that was a very rewarding experience for me.
So even before libertarianism, you had a sort of rooted in compassion, correct? You seem like a very compassionate person. You're very concerned about injustice.
That's right. That's right. And that's, one of the reasons I wanted to be a lawyer. I mean, a lawyer, you could correct injustices. You could represent the little guy, and I represented the little guy in a lot of cases. And it was very, very gratifying. And I thought that I would do that the rest of my life. I mean, I'd want to be a lawyer since I was a kid. And but sometimes there's an old saying: if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
Exactly, that is very true.
Yeah,
now,
got it.
Are you Catholic?
I am.
That's, of course, being Laredo. That's our roots as well. So you must be gratified to see the pronouncements coming out from Pope Leo against the war.
Oh, they're awesome. I'm gratified. It's enormously exciting for me. And also on immigrants, defending immigrants and condemning what the heck's going on here, the tyrannical steps that the federal government's taking against illegal immigrants here, and to a certain extent, other immigrants as well, legal. And it's wonderful to see this going on, to see somebody of that stature taking the right position, the moral position, the religious position with respect to foreign policy and immigration.
It seems like he's a pope for these times, but it's the immigration issue, and I do want to do a deep dive into your views on libertarianism, because there's a division in the libertarian camp. Some of them, like the Hans Hermann Hoppe type camp, seem to be not very pro-immigrant, while others, and it makes sense to me, seem to say, well, it's a contractual thing. If someone wants to hire somebody, who is a government or a state to say you can't hire those people or you can't bring those people? So I want to discuss that a little more when we go into the libertarianism, the bulk of this conversation. But just very quickly for the audience, how did you come upon the teachings of libertarianism and Austrian economics? How old were you, by the way, when you came upon that?
I was in my late 20s. I don't recall exactly how old, but it had to be around 28, 29, somewhere in there. I think it was 28. But I was, practicing law, and I loved practicing law. And I was studying nothing but trial books, cross-examinations, jury summation, and so forth, going to conferences on how to be a better lawyer, a trial lawyer. And but I was involved with politics, and I just was disgusted about what was going on in the political world. And so I walked into the public library in Laredo one day, just looking for something to read. And I went over to the political science section, and I saw 4 little books on the lower shelf, different colored books. and they were called Essays on Liberty, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so I pulled up volume 1 and I started to thumb through it, and I was just bowled over. I mean, this was just like a road to Damascus experience. I couldn't believe what I was reading. And then I picked up volume 2, and it was the same. Now, these were powerful, no compromise, principled essays on libertarianism. And that's what had the power to break what I believe was this encasement of indoctrination that had encased my mind ever since the first grade. I went to public schools where you really do get indoctrinated into believing that you live in a free country. You live the life of a free person, and America is freedom, and you do the Pledge of Allegiance and all. So by the time you graduate from high school, you're really convinced you live in a free country. And I had no doubts about that. I was 28 or 29. I'm reading these books, and I can feel the power of these essays cracking apart this indoctrination. And I checked out all 4 books, took them home, pored over them, read them again. And at that moment, Javier, I knew my life was changing. I knew it. Something was happening here that was pulling me in the direction of libertarianism. So I put away my trial books and I never picked them up again. And I started searching out the authors of these essays, like Ludwig von Mises and Leonard Reed and others that were just hardcore principled libertarians. And that's the road I decided to take.
Wow. And so you read early on all of the Austrian authors like Mises, Rothbard.
Exactly.
You read Ayn Rand as well?
Yeah, actually, Rand was my first exposure, but it wasn't like this road to Damascus experience. I'd taken off some time to go into the Army for 3 months at Fort Benning at infantry school, and I had 2 months of law school left in that semester. 2 months free before I returned to law school after I'd doing that Army duty. So I was waiting tables in Dallas, and I was watching television in the afternoons before I had to go to work. And they had the afternoon movie, and it was called Bowling for Dollars or something like that. And the Fountainhead comes on. This is one of Rand's big novels. And I was just floored watching this movie with Gary Cooper and Patricia Neal. And I said, wow, I've never seen anything like this. And so it said based on the novel by Ayn Rand, and I went and bought Fountainhead and loved it, just read through it all. But it never occurred to me to go further past that. So I just set that aside. Later, after I discovered libertarianism, then I discovered Atlas Shrugged. And of course, then I poured over that, and that was a huge, huge thing to read Atlas Shrugged. So Rand played a very big role in my intellectual development. I saw her make her last public address. I was fortunate enough to be there at the conference in New Orleans, where an investment conference, where she was giving the keynote address.
Wow. Did you meet her?
No. I was like a nobody back then, So I was just attending as a lawyer, and I didn't feel comfortable going up to her and introducing myself or anything like that.
That was a sort of amazing transmission from her to you. But now, before you became a libertarian, did you ever get into socialism or the left? Or were you always just sort of run of the mill? So I know most people in Laredo, like my grandparents, they were sort of like conservative Democrats. Then my father went hard Republican. But were you political at all, or did you just see this as sort of an injustice that you were personally fighting against, the immigration thing?
No, I was political. My dad was very political. Everybody was a Democrat back then. There were no Republicans. There was one Republican in town, as I remember, a lawyer. But everybody was a Democrat. So you were either a liberal Democrat or a conservative Democrat. And so in the 5th grade, I campaigned for John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, and actually went with my dad with a political group from Laredo to the Johnson Ranch, where I shook hands with Lyndon Johnson. And so I was just stuffing envelopes at night and stuff, but loving it. And then when I went back, I got involved in a gubernatorial campaign, helping out a guy who was a Democrat. And I was a liberal Democrat. I really believe that government should be helping the poor. I was on the legal aid board of trustees in Laredo, the board of directors there. I was the ACLU representative in Laredo, and I had no doubts that government should be helping the poor. Why shouldn't it? It was government's money. Why can't the government do whatever it wants with it? And then I discovered libertarianism, and I realized, oh, wow, how wrong am I, and how wrong are the liberals, morally, economically, every which way. And then I discovered the libertarian solution to the immigration crisis, which was just perfect for me, because it was like, wow, now my whole worldview is coming together in a consistent whole that envelops immigration. Remember, I was already representing these guys for free and stuff, trying to end the injustice of the immigration control system and what the Border Patrol was doing. But now I had a philosophy that reinforced what I was already instinctively thinking.
I remember reading that Friedrich Hayek even started out as a sort of a socialist before he discovered economics. I believe Rothbard as well. And Churchill had this interesting quote. He said that if you're young and you're not a socialist, you don't have a heart. But if you're old and you are a socialist, you don't have a brain. But this ties into the fact that I was talking about at the beginning of the interview, that in order to, we all have compassion, and most of that expresses itself in left-wing politics. But in order to actually know how things function, you've got to study and you've got to research. And I don't know if the majority of people are willing to actually do that. And the older you get, the harder it is to get you to do that. Is that true in your experience? To be a libertarian, you have to go sort of the intellectual route. You have to actually study why government doesn't work. Like Mises said, the job of the economist is to tell the government what they cannot do.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's so easy to have the pablum of government helping the poor, and this is one of the advantages that leftists have, liberals in the corrupted sense of the term, progressives, is that if you oppose some welfare state program, it's so easy for them to say, "Oh, you just hate the poor. Oh, you're just defending the rich," and then that little soundbite influences people because they can't think. I mean, that's one of the things about public schooling that I'm so opposed to, is that people don't learn how to think. They learn how to memorize. And with the point you're making is totally valid. In order to understand the fallacies of these little bromides, you have to do some studying and analyzing and saying, okay, why does Jacob oppose public housing, for example? Why does he oppose Social Security or Medicare? And then when you start asking that question, then you're open to understanding why libertarians are so opposed to the way of life that we have today, both domestically as well as in foreign policy.
And just to get down to brass tacks, I watched with great interest, and it's actually, I was acquainted with you years ago when I read on Lew Rockwell that you were running for president. But I sort of didn't read about you again until I saw this debate with you and Professor Walter Block. And of course, I was totally on your side in this debate. I don't know what happened to Professor Block. It seems like he sort of went off with this Israel thing. But you talked about anarchism in that debate, and you criticized anarchism. And the people, most of the people that I've studied have been in the anarcho-capitalist camp. If you look at Rothbard, if you look at Hans Hermann Hoppe, and most of the people at the Mises Institute, they are to varying degrees or another anarchists. Now, you take the position, it seems, of minarchism. And I was hoping you could explain to our audience, first of all, the difference between these two camps and why you think that if government is, by definition predatory, why would a little of it be okay? It seems that you take the view of minarchism. I could be wrong here, but could you go into that a little bit for us?
No, your analysis is absolutely correct. And your analysis about the libertarian movement is correct too. But there's the other side, people like Ludwig von Mises, who has been the biggest influence for me in libertarian economic thinking. He was limited government. Leonard Reed, the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education, he had the biggest influence on me. He was limited government. But then they're the anarchists, and they say, oh, no, you can't have limited government. You've got to abolish all government. Now, it's easy for me to understand why they reach that conclusion, because the federal government does so many horrific things that it's easy for somebody to conclude, oh, I'm anti-government, because they automatically conclude that these things that the government's doing that are horrific, evil even, are inherent to government. Now, I'm doing a current series, a video series on at the Future of Freedom Foundation that people can find in the multimedia section at fff.org, where I show the fallacy of this thinking. That what I'm showing is that if you start out with a limited government republic, which was our founding governmental system, that you find that in the 20th century, a lot of evil systems got attached to that governmental structure. And I call it like cancerous tumors. And they've just entangled themselves in the bureaucracies with like tentacles, and they become semi-permanent. For example, the national security state. I mean, that's now considered an inherent part of the federal government. The big standing army, Pentagon, CIA, NSA, they're synonymous in people's minds. The federal government is the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. They cannot imagine life extracting this system. The drug war, the income tax, the welfare state, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So what I argue is that none of these systems existed onto America's governmental structure, for example, in the late 1800s. None of them. You had a system, which is my favorite time in history, like from 1880 to 1910, no income tax. People kept 100% of what they earned. No Social Security, no Medicare, no welfare state, no national security state, no Pentagon, CIA, NSA.
Of course, they did have tariffs.
They had tariffs, not enormous tariffs, enough to do revenue. We'll talk about that in a second. But the founders said, we just don't want direct taxes because they're so tyrannical, like an income tax and an IRS. When you pay a sales tax, okay, it's bad, but it's not intrusive as an income tax and an IRS is. But no Federal Reserve, no paper money, no immigration controls, no public schools to speak of. So what I'm saying is that I'm a minarchist in that I favor a limited government republic with all these evil systems removed, repealed, and preferably ended by constitutional amendments so that it becomes essentially permanent. So what's the difference? Now, what about taxation? Now, okay, the central element of libertarianism is no initiation of force. That it's wrong to initiate force. So that you can't go out and murder, rape, steal, and so forth. All right, so why do you need government? Well, I say you need government to punish the people that do those things, murder, rape, steal, and so forth. And you need a government to have a court system so people can go and resolve disputes, and where there's a final arbiter, whether it's right or wrong. You've got a final Supreme Court that's going to say you win and you lose. Under anarchy, you don't have that. And so it's perpetual conflict under anarchy because you have competing judicial system, competing Supreme Courts. And then you've got a basic military force to protect the country from an invasion. All right, so how do you fund this type of government? Well, I believe that you can have a limited government republic that's voluntarily funded.
Voluntarily.
Yeah, just like people fund churches. I think most people believe that government's important, and so they'll fund it voluntarily. And then government lives within its means. But if you look at like the period of time I was talking about, tariffs and excise taxes were funding the government along with some land sales. It was like about 1 or 2% of the gross national product in the country. The federal government was tiny. So nobody really cared about the excise taxes and the tariffs because people were making so much money, no income tax at all. People were going from rags to riches in that 30, 40-year period in 1, 2, 3 generations. America's discovered the key to getting wealthy, the key to ending poverty, really.
It's the free market. That's the key.
A total free market, but meaning not what they call a free market today.
Precisely.
A market that's totally free of any government control, taxation, regulation, supervision, whatever, where people are genuinely free to engage in economic enterprise without any government interference at all. No minimum wage, no licensure laws, no economic controls whatsoever. That's why I'm a minarchist. I think you need to have government. I'm not anti-government. I'm anti-evil systems that have become part of the government. When you start taking out these cancers on the body politic starts getting very, very healthy. And that's what I'm shooting for.
Now, do you favor the system of representative democracy, one man, one vote that we have now?
Yeah, but you see, that's not like really critically important to me because, and here's a reason. I mean, I favor a representative democracy, of course, but the only real advantage to a representative democracy is that it provides people an ability to change officials and change directions peacefully. If you don't have that, you're going to have violence as a way to change the direction or change people. But if you limit the power of government to do bad things for people, bad things to people, or good things for people, so that there's no welfare state, for example, and so you don't have income tax deductions and special income tax privileges and all that, where the government just doesn't have any power to do hardly anything, you don't really care who's in office. It doesn't matter. They can't do anything for you. They can't do anything against you. Take ministers, church ministers. How often do you see church ministers, lobbying a member of Congress? Never, because the members of Congress don't have power to give them money. If they did, they'd be lobbying. So if you remove the power of government to give out benefits to people, subsidies and so forth, grants, and bad things like income tax and privileges and so forth, nobody's going to care who's elected. It becomes essentially irrelevant.
So just to play devil's advocate, the anarchist would say, well, Jacob, we had that. The Constitution wasn't perfect by any means, but it was, like you said, a lot smaller government than we had now. But they were able to amend the Constitution. They were able to change the laws by vote so that these cancers could grow. And we go back to the education factor, because I remember Bjorn Bavek, who wrote these books against Marx. Mises said that before voting, every citizen should be required to read Jürgen von Bjorn Bavek and know the arguments against Marxism and so forth. So they would argue that a representative democracy just means that we can brainwash people and have them vote to add these cancers to government. What would you say to that?
Well, what I would say is the Constitution, think of the Constitution as a seawall. Let's say there's a community on the ocean and they get flooded periodically.
Like Galveston.
Like Galveston, okay. So what do you do to protect yourself against that flooding? You build a seawall. That's what Galveston did. They built a seawall. So the seawall works. I mean, it prevents flooding. Sometimes there's a flood that goes over the seawall a bit, but by and large, the seawall works. So if you look at the 19th century, by and large, the Constitution worked, because if you look at 1900, for example, or let's say 1897, before the Spanish-American War, you had no income taxation, no Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, immigration controls to speak of. You started to have the beginnings of an immigration control system. In other words, for 100 years, it works. The seawall works. Now, that there were floods over it, like during the Civil War, and Lincoln suspends habeas corpus and so forth. But then things returned back to normal again. Well, what ends up happening, though, you get in the early 20th century, you get a tsunami of change of opinion. These are new people. They're the great grandchildren of the people that were living in the 19th century. They have new ideas, different conceptions of what government should do. And so how do you protect yourself against a tsunami like that, where people saying, we want government to take care of us? There's the vicissitudes of life. Things go bad in life. People go broke. They get sick in their old age. They don't have any savings. We need government to protect us. So the tsunami overwhelms the seawall in Galveston, and everybody says, oh, the seawall failed. Well, no, the seawall didn't fail. That wasn't the purpose of the seawall. The purpose of the seawall is to protect against high tides. And that's what happened here. We had a seawall in favor of the welfare state that it starts to change with the Spanish-American War. You had inklings of it in the late 19th century, minimum wage laws at the state level. You get the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, the income tax in 1913. 1930s, everything. Here's where the tsunami came in with respect to Social Security and the welfare state. In the 40s, the national security state, people were overwhelmed with fear of the Reds, that the commies are coming to get us. We need to change our governmental structure to a national security state. Most of this was done without a constitutional amendment. Paper money. No constitutional amendment at all to adopt a system of paper money. For over 100 years, we used gold coins and silver coins and no Federal Reserve System. That was changed without even the semblance of a constitutional amendment. So even in an anarchy society, Javier, let's assume there's no government at all. If you've got 95% of the populace saying we want government to protect us, anarchy's not going to stop that. They just call a government into existence. In other words, you can't stop the 95%. All you can do is try to change things down the line.
It's all about education, and it would seem to me it's all about really focusing on ourselves personally as well, is it not? Trying to sort of maximize liberty in our own lives.
Well, it's a fascinating point. I mean, what you're really raising is the issue of methodology. Is how do you move the country back in the right direction? And that requires soul searching. And it's not really an educational process in the sense, at least that's not the way we see it, the Future of Freedom Foundation, where you're proselytizing to people and trying to convert people. I don't think you can convert people. I think people have to convert themselves. And so it's like me, I discovered this philosophy and I was receptive to it. It changed the course of my life. And there's just certain people that are receptive to libertarianism, and the light bulbs go off and they say, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. And they start reading Mises and Hayek and Bastiat and they're alive. I mean, that's what education is. It's a seeking process where you discover something and whatever it is, and you get excited about it and you start absorbing everything you can find. And that's how society changes directions. And so we kind of see ourselves as kind of Johnny Appleseeds at the Future of Freedom Foundation. You're putting all these ideas, free market ideas, out into the marketplace for people to discover. And sometimes the seed takes root and other times it doesn't, but that's okay. That's not up to us. We can't control the outcome. And so that's why we don't get burned out. A lot of libertarians get burned out because they get so frustrated and angry and the world's not moving in the direction they want it to move. And so they get burned down and they drop out. We don't, because, we don't feel like we were assigned the task of saving the world. God didn't give us that job. And the world's in good hands. It's in his hands. And so
like, Isaiah's job, that essay.
That's a fantastic essay. Yeah. For your viewers, it's Isaiah's Act by Albert J. Nock, I think, as I recall. And so Isaiah says to God, why do you have me giving this message to people? Nobody wants to listen. And God says, there's a remnant and they're listening. You just can't see them, but they need to hear this message to fortify them. You just keep giving the message. Leave the rest to me. And that's the way we feel.
It's like individualism is not only the end, it's the methodology.
Exactly. And self-improvement. This is where Leonard Reed had such an impact on me, and I highly recommend Reed's books. You can find them online, Leonard E. Reed. But Reed always talked about spend time working on yourself, improving your understanding of liberty so that you attract people to you that want to learn more. And so it's an educational process with respect to educating yourself and improving yourself.
And just incidentally, on this vein, before we go into the current events, which is a really exciting part of the interview, what made you sort of quit practicing law and found the Future of Freedom Foundation? What was the story of that, just briefly?
Well, one day I was doing libertarianism as a hobby. And so I told you I was in Dallas and I met other libertarians there and Austrians. There's a little Austrian contingent there in Dallas.
Oh, yeah, I'm one of them.
Yeah, I mean, back then, this is back in the 80s. And Richard Ebeling, who I work with now at the Future Freedom Foundation, he teaches at the Citadel Economics. But there was this little group there, including a couple people that were working at the Dallas Fed. So I formed the Mont Dallas Society, modeled after the Mont Pelerin Society. And we would meet once a month to discuss Austrian economics and libertarianism and stuff. And so I was doing this. I had a speakers program coming in, Dallas and Houston. I organized the whole thing just as a hobby. I was taking a tutorial at the University of Dallas with the head of the economics department there on Austrian economics. And suddenly one day, the Foundation for Economic Education, which is the oldest free market libertarian think tank in the country, educational foundation. They were founded, I think, in 1946, if I'm not mistaken, and by this man, Leonard Reed. They called me up and said, we're going to present you with a choice. And they said, we want to offer you a position as program director here, which obviously would mean giving up your law practice, and choice is up to you. So there I was, finally faced, okay, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I knew this was a turning point. So I went to the beach at Port Aransas and did a lot of soul searching and praying. And finally I decided I just got to go where my heart is. So I contacted all my clients and said, I'm hanging it up, and got in my car, packed my bags, and moved to New York.
The rest is history.
Well, yeah. Well, I stayed there 2 years, and then I left to start the Future of Freedom Foundation. And I've been doing the Future of Freedom Foundation for 36 years now.
And you're excited every day to go to work.
Oh, I love it. I thank God every day that I'm able to do this. I mean, there's just nothing in life better than to do your hobby for a living. I mean, it's wonderful. I love waking up in the morning and getting ready to write my day. I write an article every day. It's just, yes. And I do podcasts and stuff. It's a nice life. I have a lot to be grateful for.
Now, a hard pivot here. Trump.
Okay.
I think you were never taken in by Trump. And at the beginning, I saw the red flags with Trump before he started running, when he said that he wanted to put all Muslims on a registration list. We never did that. But I said no libertarian could ever support Trump. And yet almost the entire libertarian camp ended up supporting Trump. And I voted for him the last time just because of the fact that he said that we were not going to have any foreign wars. And I saw him as like the only choice that could possibly keep us out of World War III. It seems that we are now in World War III. How did so many of us get taken in by Trump?
Well, because of these positions that he was taking. He was talking like a libertarian in certain areas. No foreign wars, no new wars. The deep state. Remember when he used to slam the deep state and he was going to drain the swamp? And so libertarians, whose foreign policy is one of non-interventionism, at least rightly understood. There's a lot of libertarians that don't favor total non-interventionism, but they liked what he was saying. And it's been an absolute disaster, a disaster for the libertarian movement, because the average person out there now believes that libertarianism is essentially a Republican-like version of republicanism. I have a neighbor that I just had a conversation with him on politics, and I brought up libertarianism, and he says, "Well, Jacob, I'm confused. Isn't libertarianism just part of the Republican Party?" And I said, "Well, yeah, it is, but it's not supposed to be." And so I think they got taken in because they believed that what Trump was going to do, he said he was going to do, he was going to do. And I knew it was all bull because I saw him his first term. He said the same thing in his first term. And deep state, drain the swamp. First thing he does is he goes over to CIA headquarters and, in my opinion, kneels and kisses the ring. I mean, that's a figure of speech, but he made no effort to dismantle the national security state or to take them on like John Kennedy did. And so I knew it was bull. To me, the real power in the federal government is the national security state. And I was hoping he would take them on, but I knew he wouldn't because he didn't the first time around. And so this time around, and on immigration, I mean, you see that now you're going back to those libertarians you were talking about that favor immigration controls.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that next. Please go ahead on our theory of immigration here.
Yeah, well, these people, they come into the movement from the Republican Party that, it's disgruntled Republicans. They dominate the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian movement, but they bring their baggage with them. And instead of just saying, well, we're sorry that we've got our luggage here that we brought with us, like on immigration controls, they instead say, oh, well, no, this is the real libertarian position, which is ridiculous. I mean, open borders has always been the libertarian position. It's the only position that's consistent with the non-aggression principle, which is the core principle of libertarianism. In other words, the idea that people should be free to cross borders back and forth without any government interference at all. To get a conception of it, think domestically, that everybody domestically has open borders. You can cross any state border you want without seeing a government official. And you see, welcome to the state of Alabama or welcome to Virginia or whatever, but no government officials at the border. That's libertarianism. And it's the same applies internationally. People just crossing back and forth. They keep their citizenship. They don't need to become a new American citizen unless they want to, but they just interact as human beings. So these disgruntled Republicans came in and said, oh, we can't handle that. That's just too shocking. So we're going to come up with this ridiculous justification for making this the true libertarian position, which is. It
seems to me that libertarianism is opposed to nationalism on principle, as opposed to populism. It seems like a lot of people are trying to bring nationalism into libertarianism. If you read Ayn Rand, you'll see very clearly that the racism and nationalism is a lower rung on the ladder of humanity, and libertarianism sort of takes us beyond that, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely, because it's an individual philosophy. It focuses on the individual and the sanctity of the individual. And this is where it intersects with religion, that each person is unique. Each person is one of a kind. And the purpose of life, none of us know what the purpose of life is, but you instinctively think it has something to do with growing and maturing and developing and becoming a better person. And so you want a society where you have the widest ambit of action to do that. So everything focuses on the individual, not the nation, not the group, not the tribe, but on the individual's freedom to live his life the way he wants, even when his choices are bad choices, drug addicts or alcoholics or tobacco addicts or whatever. We don't condone those kind of things, but freedom entails the right to make bad choices as long as there's no initiation of force. That's how people grow, Javier. We're talking about freedom to fall. Freedom to make mistakes. And this is what the omnipotent state won't let people do. No, we can't let you do that. We can't let you keep your own money because you might not help your parents out. And so we need to take money from you for Social Security to give to your parents because you're a bad person. And we're not going to let you for your own good.
A lot of it's fear, because I was talking to a coworker just the other day about libertarianism and how I've never taken drugs. I wouldn't recommend anyone take drugs, but drugs should be legal because as long as you're not harming anyone else, you're an adult. And this person was like, oh, no, we can't allow that. Society will disintegrate. I think that's what prevents a lot of people from jumping on board with libertarianism, because they fear that if they allow people the freedom of choice, that or if they let people have freedom of choice, that will involve social disintegration.
Oh, absolutely. And you see, and this is the problem with having grown up under these kind of systems. Remember, drug laws formed no part of American society for over 100 years. This, again, the 19th century, American society didn't fall apart. There was people taking drugs. There was people drinking alcohol. There was alcoholism, rampant alcoholism. That's the temperance movement and all that. But society doesn't fall apart. Society deals with these issues. I would argue that when you've got the government waging this war on drugs for like 50 years or something, that's what's causing society to disintegrate. I mean, they've destroyed Mexico. When I was a kid, you could travel in Mexico freely and not worry about a thing. My parents went on their honeymoon to Acapulco driving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody would dare do that. When I was growing up in Laredo, we would go on dates across the river into Nuevo Laredo where you could drink. There was no drinking age. We go
My father talked about that.
Yeah, there were floor shows. I mean, the parents didn't allow either the guys, especially not the girls, but we all did it, and we never got caught. But now you wouldn't dare do that because of the drug war, the kidnappings, the murders, and so forth. It's the drug war that's disintegrating society, not the drug usage.
Yeah, what I was telling him is that there would be if drugs were legal and you had, Ma and Pa were able to sell drugs, you wouldn't have cartels because the profits wouldn't be there.
Exactly. You wouldn't have a black market. I mean, the black market attracts these kind of people, the unsavory people, the killers, while a free market attracts the pharmacies and the reputable businesses that have a good product because they don't want to get sued. And so it creates a harmony in society, even in the midst of some people making bad choices. But also in a free market, the addict has the incentive to seek treatment. He doesn't need to worry about going to AA and discover there's a narc there that's going to bust him or start watching him and monitoring him and then busting him. In other words, to get rid of an addiction, you're better off openly talking about your addiction. You can't do that in a drug war situation. They'll bust you and put you in the jail.
So moving along on libertarian issues here, I wanted to ask you about this. I have not seen this talked about much in the libertarian literature. I'm sure there are articles about it, but in my view, the corporation is not a libertarian concept because it involves government coming in and protecting you from liability or giving you limited liability. And there are articles of incorporation. So I think in a libertarian society, corporations wouldn't exist. So you would just be operating with your own, sole proprietorship. What do you say to that? What are your views on the corporation? Because it seems to me that a lot of the problems on the free market have been caused by incorporation.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I mean, you're talking about issues that arise within the context of a free market, and the government intends to facilitate things in a free market sense by organizing the concept of a corporation. And obviously, it's an artificial construct. But I do believe that you would have joint stock companies even in the absence of government intervention. I mean, let's assume you had no articles of incorporation issued by the state. I think you'd have stock companies that would still work as stock companies, but there wouldn't be that limited liability. And unless they announced in advance that if you deal with us, there will be limited liability, then it's a voluntary, mutually beneficial transaction. If they make that announcement and people say, no, we're not going to do business with you if your liability is limited, okay. But there might be people saying, okay, I'll take that risk. So I agree with you. I don't think you need these things. I think a free market would construct it.
As long as there's an agreement. That's interesting because the leftists say, well, billionaires are a problem for society and there shouldn't be billionaires.
I think there'd be a huge prospering middle class, but I think there would be very, very wealthy people.
But not the kind of oligarchs, let's say.
Remember that in this kind of system, somebody gets wealthy, becomes a billionaire by making a product that other people are willing to pay for. And so if you have a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs that create something that people absolutely love. And I have no doubts that they're going to flock to him and make him a multi-billionaire. But there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you see, that's where the sins of envy and covetousness come in. Don't worry about that guy. In fact, the rich do a tremendous benefit to society. That's capital that makes people more productive. They open up businesses that give jobs to people. They buy things that give jobs to people, whether they're yachts or Lexuses or whatever. Everybody's benefiting in a society where everybody's free to accumulate unlimited amounts of wealth. And then there's charity. And if you take like John D. Rockefeller in the 19th century, this was the wealthiest man. This was the Bill Gates of his time, or whoever the wealthiest person in the United States in the world is. But John D. Rockefeller, I'm sure if you translate it in current dollars, was a billionaire. This guy gave away $500 million in his lifetime. I mean, this is how the hospitals got built, and the opera houses and the schools and so forth. So yeah, I think you still have very, very wealthy people, billionaires, but I say great, more power to them, as long as they're making their money legitimately and not through government plunder.
Exactly. That's the key here. Now, switching gears to the war here. And of course, I think anybody who's Christian, anybody who's a moral person, knows that this sort of preemptive war, especially threatening to destroy entire civilizations, is wrong. If you've been to Sunday school, you know this is wrong. But what do you think is the end game here? Because it seems to me that Trump, he doesn't seem like he's insane, but it seems to me that the people who are starting this war know that there are very disastrous consequences. You know, people are talking about the fact there could be a famine because fertilizer is not able to get through the Strait of Hormuz. People are talking about this could be, you know, the end of civilization. And certainly certain countries are already suffering. Do you think this is like an engineered takedown? Or do you think our people really are that stupid and they just went into this thinking that they could defeat Iran in a few days and it's backfired on them?
I think the latter. And I mean, you know, this was the big problem, is that when they're successful, quote, successful, the interventions, it encourages them to do it again. And so they had this Venezuelan intervention, which they consider as a tremendous success. I think it's a moral disaster, but they saw it as a big military success. So, why don't we do it to Iran? We'll just start a war there. And so Trump says, I don't need to consult with anybody. I don't care about a declaration of war. I don't care what the Constitution says. I don't care about European allies or whatever. I'm going to get this done, and I have no doubts. And they did. I mean, when you look at what they did with the military conquest, and I kept saying that this was going to happen. The mainstream press was saying, oh, this could be a disastrous war for America and stuff. I kept saying this will be a cakewalk. This is a third world country. It's been hollowed out by decades of sanctions. They will establish air superiority in one day. And they did. They smashed all their Navy, their Army, their Air Force, everything. I'm not sure what their Army stands, but militarily, they did it in 3 or 4 days. They smashed them. What they didn't anticipate was the Strait of Hormuz thing. But Javier, it's important, and this is what we keep telling people at the Future of Freedom Foundation. Don't get overly focused on this particular intervention, because it's whack-a-mole. And this is where the national security state comes in. Remember these evil systems that have been attached to the federal government, the national security state, and the concept of foreign interventionism and the vast military industrial complex. I mean, look at what they've accomplished. They had the Cold War racket. They had Vietnam, sacrificed 58,000 of my generation for nothing. They go to the war on terrorism. 9/11 was blowback for the people they were killing in Iraq with their sanctions, stationing troops in Islamic holy lands over there, provoking people. Then they get the whole Patriot Act. They get Afghanistan for 20 years. And even when they get booted out, defeated by the Taliban, Americans are not given an opportunity to just, hey, let's do some soul searching here. Let's digest what's happened. They immediately provoke Russia into attacking Ukraine by using NATO to go up there on Russia's borders. And then they start this war with Venezuela out of clear blue. Remember, on Venezuela, it just started out of nowhere. And this is and then they now go to Iran. There'll be more. As soon as they finish with Iran, that maybe it'll be Cuba next.
Or Turkey.
Turkey. They never stop because the national security state needs crises. They need chaos. And John Kennedy figured this out. And so as long as you have a national security state, this is the coin of the realm. Crisis, chaos, fear, warmongering, coups, assassinations, whatever, in order to keep them in power and in the money.
This is just a continuation of the same playbook that we've seen since the beginning.
Not from the beginning, from the
beginning of the interventionist state.
Exactly. That once that conversion took place, like in the 1940s, but you saw inklings of it in the early part of the 20th century. That I mentioned the Spanish-American War. That's where it starts. That's where the shift starts. World War I, which leads to World War II, the Cold War, and then it just becomes continuous. The national security state right after World War II, it's what we call perpetual war for perpetual peace.
Like Hitler said, we need an enemy to rally the people, and that's basically what they do.
That's exactly what they do. That is their expertise, coming up with official enemies. Remember, China was not an official enemy a while back. We were celebrating that the Chinese were dismantling to a certain extent their socialist economic system. They were doing well, but all of a sudden, oh no, we need new official enemies.
Now they're back.
Now they're back.
So you don't think if you go to X right now, you think the world is about to end. You don't think we're going into Armageddon?
No.
This Iran conflict?
No. It's in the larger scheme of things, it's not there. Armageddon for me is all-out nuclear war. Now, in a sense, indirectly, they're playing with it because they don't care about the consequences. China has a huge reserve of oil. I don't know how large, but it's apparently enormous. But they get most of their oil from, or at least they were the principal purchaser from the oil that going through the strait. I could imagine a scenario where all of a sudden they start to get squeezed. And then what? Are American forces really going to board Chinese ships carrying oil? And if they do, are the Chinese going to let them do that? Well, I would assume that China probably would let them do it, but they're playing with nuclear fire here with this game. But I don't see that on the horizon at all. I don't.
This truce holds, this ceasefire that we're in. Do you think this is the end of the massive part of the war with Iran?
I don't know.
Before we go after someone else?
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know how this is going to play out. The strategy of the blockade to block the blockader is an interesting strategy, and so I don't know who's going to give in first. I think
Iran has given in. They said it's completely open now, but more to come on that. This is in the last few hours. Trump said it's open.
Yeah, but the U.S. has said, but it's not open as far as we're concerned. So now you have the U.S. blockading. So this may just be strategic maneuvering on the part of the Iranians saying, look who's blocking the oil now.
Exactly, and it's just a freak show. One last issue I wanted to go in with you is the AI issue. You see, for me, this whole AI issue, because if you go on X again, you think the world's about to end because of AI. They say it's going to take every job. It's going to take every blue-collar job. Now Elon Musk is saying we need to have a universal high income where the government gives people income because nobody's going to work. And in my limited understanding of economics, here's what I think. Because if AI is producing goods, but at the same time, people are getting laid off, they can't afford these goods. So who is AI producing goods for? There would be no economy. So it seems to me just economically, it's not possible that AI supplants all jobs. First of all, what's your general view of where AI is going? Is it going to take over the majority of jobs? And second of all, how would we as libertarians prevent mass starvation if that were to happen?
Well, I don't know what direction it is taking, but really this is just a variation on a theme that was taking place in the late 1800s, with inventions. And people were saying, oh my gosh, we can't have this new invention because it's going to put people out of jobs, like the automobile. We don't want automobiles because think of all the buggy whip people that make buggy whips and stuff. What's going to happen to them? Well, you see it in toll booths. It's toll booths. You used to have people in all these toll booths, and now you have the Easy Pass or whatever. What happened to all those people in the toll booths? You don't see them starved. Yeah, exactly. And it's like immigrants, illegals displace people at the bottom picking the crops, but the illegals are buying automobiles and used clothes and so forth. So business is blossoming there that hires the people that used to be on those farms at higher rates of pay. So all AI does is take care of this sector where people might get displaced, but there's more prosperity in the other sectors that are offering jobs to people. I mean, did computers put people out of jobs? No, because look how many people went to work for the computer industry. So to me, it's exactly the same thing. Now, are people affected in certain jobs? No question about it, but that's life. Sometimes you have to shift careers like I did.
Exactly. Again, it just goes back to a misunderstanding of economics. I think why people are so scared is because they don't understand economics.
Well, that's right. And change is always difficult, you see. And I think this is one of the selling points of the welfare warfare state is that we will protect you from change, the drastic kind of change that we'll protect you from that. We'll keep you safe. And they appeal to people with the siren song. Well, life involves change. I mean, sometimes it's drastic, sometimes it's minor, but it's really what makes life interesting and exciting too. I mean, God has created a very interesting process here for us from birth to death.
Yes, and we've got to enjoy it. Jacob Hornberger, thank you so much for joining me. I think it was a fascinating discussion.
Oh, it was my honor and my pleasure. I had a tremendous time. Thank you, Javier, for having me on, and thank you, your viewers, for watching this.
Thanks, and I hope to have you on again.
That'd be fantastic. Would love it. Thank you.
Wonderful.